All right. Hi, folks. Welcome. We still have people joining, but that's okay. I'll take things slow to start off here. My name is Justice. I'm the technology manager at Northhouse Folk School, and I'm going to start just by giving you a really quick rundown on how Zoom will work for this webinar in case you haven't been with us for one of these in the past. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a few buttons down there. You have a chat button. That's the best place to just share general comments. You can either direct those comments to the presenter only or to everybody in the webinar, depending on whether you select all panelists at the top or all panelists and attendees. And if you would like to, feel free to just go ahead and chat in that box and let us know, let everybody know where you're coming from tonight. It'll be fun to see everyone's names and locations in there. So again, you can just select the chat box and then click all panelists and attendees. And if you feel like it, let us know where you're from. There's also a polling button at the bottom, you'll see also. You can click on that. There's just a few brief questions that will let us know how you found the webinar, and it will also, you can indicate whether you would like us to follow up with you by email and share the recording afterwards. And speaking of the recording, this webinar is being recorded, so if you do miss any of it, or if you have any audio glitches along the way, or if you want to share it with friends afterwards, you can check out the recording. Again, we can email that to you if you select that option in the poll, or it will be available on the Northhouse website as well. And then finally, there's a Q&A button. At any time during David's presentation, if you have a question, just click that Q&A button and go ahead and type it in there. After the presentation, we will walk through those questions and we will relay them for David to answer. So again, the chat button is just for general comments. If you want to say, hey, do it in the chat. If you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A box. That just makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of those questions and make sure that we're able to address all of them. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Greg Wright, Executive Director at Northhouse, and he will take things from here.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here together. I'm Greg Wright. I'm the director of Northhouse, and on behalf of the whole team here at Northhouse, welcome. It is great to have you. Wow, 2020. What a different year. And that said, how joyous to be celebrating together with the Wooden Boat Show. Obviously, this year, our first ever online edition, very, very different, but still wonderful. And it's fun to think back to those earliest days. The first Wooden Boat Show, 1998. The school was literally just a year old. It offered 23 classes in its first year. The founders had started Northhouse because they believed the North had stories that needed to be told. They knew that people needed to gather, to share those stories, to share skills, to build community. And they knew that while coursework was going to be central to that sense of connection and that understanding the North was going to be connection, getting people's hands literally on the real stuff. They also knew that gathering as a community to celebrate is just so key, even in tough times, getting together to remember we're in this together, to remember that there's stories we have, to remember that there's new stories to be heard, that there's adventures out there, and to remember how important the North is, all of the cultures of the North, all the stories of the North. So Northhouse has done okay over those years. In fact, better than okay. And the Wooden Boat Show, the same. It's become an incredible family reunion. And of course, why? Well, because of people. I mean, because of the folks who said, I love the North. I've got stories to share. I'm going to get involved. Hey, I've got a pair of hands. I can show up. I can serve soup. I can clean. I can haul tables. People have volunteered. Instructors have said, I've got skills I want to share. Students, I've got curiosity. I want to learn. Donors who step forward and say, I'm going to invest in something I believe in. And where has it led us? Forward. Northhouse is a strong, capable, thriving little school, buffeted by the winds, for sure, these times, but sailing forward nonetheless. So thank you for being part of Northhouse. Thank you for being here at the Wooden Boat Show. And I always love welcoming folks to the featured speaker. Justice did a great job of explaining how things are going to work. Great to have you for the talk. Stick around for the questions and answers. Want to underscore that as part of the Wooden Boat Show, we have a $7,500 members challenge. If you haven't renewed your membership yet, feel free to step on up. Also wanted to underscore that we're, of course, curious what your thoughts are about how we host this online event. Up ahead, Unplugged, we'll be hosting that event as well. Perhaps, hopefully, some of it online, on campus, but definitely some of it online as well. And we'd love to learn from you about how it worked and how we can do better. Well, one of the things I love about the North is how it connects us. And definitely today's speaker, that is so true. Mark and Katya Gordon, who are longtime friends of the school, they teach here with their schooner or their sailboat, the Amicus, and their program Sea Change, which focuses on climate change, and this incredible lake called Lake Superior. A couple years ago said, hey, we know somebody you need to meet. He hasn't just sailed a bit, he's sailed all over the world, and he's explored the North like all of us might dream. And boy, when people come up and tell us there's somebody we've got to meet, you can be sure we sit up right away. And as we reached out, David Thoreson, the minute we met, we went, yep, Katya and Mark were right. Here's somebody we do need to know. A man who's obviously sailed further north than most of us, explored waters that we all dream of, and clearly who has both stories to share, but also a love of adventuring and a hunger to understand that I think we can all embrace and learn from. So on behalf of North House, welcome to the Wooden Boat Show, David, and thank you for being our featured speaker for Wooden Boat Show 2020, David Thoreson.
Do you have audio, Justice?
Sorry, David, we've got you now. We just had a little glitch, but you're loud and clear.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Greg, and thank you, Justice, for making sure our tech works right. You know, there's always something going on with Zoom presentations, and I promise I won't have a cat jumping on my head tonight or something like that. But if it does happen, you know, there could be a surprise. You never know. So there's been a lot of surprises this spring and early summer. It's too bad. I was so much looking forward to getting up there to Grand Marais, a place I love, and have been going up there ever since I was a young teenager to go skiing and spend time in the North, and love the North Shore. So really bummed out, but we're going to plan on trying to reconnect maybe in the autumn or sometime spring or next summer. I can get up there maybe and do another stint workshop and maybe a little fundraiser for North House or something, and get back into the community, and we can all have some fun like we should be having. And I know we're all missing that in these times. So thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jessa, for inviting me to participate in your summer solstice event and the Wooden Boat Show. So I live in Lake Okoboji, as many of you know, what we call the Iowa Great Lakes, not to be confused with your Great Lakes, but we have some really beautiful lakes here. West Lake Okoboji is very much like Lake Minnetonka or Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. And we do a lot of sailing racing here, so it's a great place. Lots of wooden boats, wooden boat tradition here also. And we have a wooden boat show every summer in August. So we have a lot of the same kind of traditions, loving the water and loving the conservation of our water resources, and being involved as advocates, and also with our changing climate and how it's affecting our waters here and our lakes and our lake levels with added precipitation. So these are all things that when we live around the lakes, we're always attuned to the weather and watching out as to what's going on. And I know you guys all do too. So I've been watching the weather up there and seeing what it would have been like if I was there this weekend. It looks kind of maybe cool and rainy, but Justice assured me that the sun would have come out for the event, as it always does for the boat show. So I'm going to take you on a couple adventures tonight. And I've already seen that there's a couple sailors I know that have checked in from my past sailing events. So this will be kind of fun. And so I'm just going to begin with the show, and I hope that you guys have a lot of questions, and I'll be happy to answer really almost anything. I love the Q&A, and mostly what I love is live audiences, but we will do our best as we can to make this a fun and lively Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started here. Okay. And rolling. Okay, so this is one of my favorite photographs, you guys. This is in the Arctic Ocean, and it was on Cloud 9 from my 2007 voyage to the Northwest Passage. And I always like to say the wind was blowing 35 knots. There was a small craft advisory along the coast of Alaska, and it was just a perfect day for sailing. You know, 15-foot seas running, and we were just screaming along the coast there toward Point Barrow. So I always like to start my show with this photograph. And if you look closely, right underneath the word changing, you can kind of see the old men of the sea floating in the wave there. It's one of my favorite shots. So as I said, I live in Okoboji. This is East and West Lake Okoboji, beautiful area, very, you know, similar deep-water lake to small Lake Superior. Kind of, we have lots of, as I said, wood boat traditions, lots of sailing, and this is the place where I grew up and learned to love the water, spending time with friends, and just like you guys up there, sharing the same kind of traditions with high water quality. And when you have high water quality and work to maintain it, you have high quality recreation and great things to do in the outdoors. And this is part of the tradition that we have here, and it sort of led to me being involved in outdoor photography and how I got started. You know, we cycle around the lakes, we have great cycling events, and we stand up paddleboard and do yoga by the water, and we have wood boats that we tool around in, and lots of Chris crafts and centuries and hacker crafts, and it's just a great place for family life and getting out in your wooden boats and putting around the lake. And it's also a place where we have tremendous migrating waterfowl. We have a lot of wetlands in this prairie pothole region. So this is an area that I love to photograph, and I've been involved in photographing in this lakes area now for the last 3 to 4 decades. And it's what I decided to do for my living on a long time ago now. And this is what we're kind of missing this summer. We have our wooden boat show on the park front. We have an old amusement park over 100 years old. And so every year we hold that wooden boat show there and have concerts down in the waterfront. So these are all the things that we're missing this summer, you guys. I know you are too up there. And so we'll get back to doing that soon. And I look forward to getting up there and seeing you. And I'll just close my little local story with this, that being around the water led to a lifetime for me of advocacy for water quality and conservation, and for trying to leave this place, you know, just a little bit better for the next generations. And I've spent my lifetime trying to do that. And sailing and exploring has been a big part of that, getting out into the world and into the outdoors and just learning all I can about nature, about how different people live in nature in different parts of the world. And again, how we can utilize nature, especially in these times of COVID-19 and what we're all going through. Nature is something we need, and public lands are worth protecting and fighting for. So let's all just keep that in mind, keep the dream alive as we spend a lot of time inside. Let's be thinking about what we can do locally to make our local areas better for families and everyone in our communities. So my story begins here in Okoboji, and this is where I grew up sailing these little boats, X-boats, and also learning to love to photograph the lakes area in the outdoors. And I started sailing my little X boat, this little 16-foot boat. That's me with a little red life jacket on, and my mom, who was quite a sailor, as was my grandfather. And you probably can't see on your computer screens, but the name of my boat was Help Upside Down. And I needed that. I needed that a lot because I spent a lot of time upside down as I was learning to sail, and spent a lot of days sailing back and forth across the lake, and then began racing, and have been racing scows now at Okoboji for about 40 years. So I sail a sea scow here now. These are the X boats. We have lots of regattas here. Kids are still sailing them as they always have, just like I did and my mom before me. And we were supposed to be holding the Inland Lakes Sailing Championships here this summer. Unfortunately, that regatta has been canceled now, like so many other things. But we're going to try to do some social distancing, local sailing, and we hope to get out there and start our season soon. I still race scows. This is me on the MC. I love to get out on the water, and sailing scows and dinghies really tunes your senses to subtle changes in wind and water conditions. And I found that it was a great help to me as I sort of transitioned into ocean sailing, to have this great background in small boat sailing and dinghies, how you can really see the wind and feel and understand through your senses what's happening with changes out there on the ocean. These are A scows, and they're very beautiful and fast boats. They've been clocked at close to 40 miles an hour, 36 knots, very, very fast and amazingly efficient sailboats. And so I started photographing sailing along with my racing many decades ago now. And I decided somewhere in there that sailing, photography, and my dream to sail the world's oceans were sort of all combining into something that if I could just find the right person, if I could just find the right means to get out of the state of Iowa and get to the ocean, I could do that. And so how does one become an expedition sailor when you grow up in Iowa? You know, you're a long ways from the ocean here, but you know, the answer comes pretty easily to me. You meet a southern Minnesota hog farmer, and the rest is history. And this is the honest to God truth. Just across the border in Donnell, Minnesota, population 117, lived my friend and mentor, Roger Swanson. And he's passed away now, unfortunately, but not before sailing over 200,000 miles around the planet, doing 3 circumnavigations, winning the Blue Water Medal, and being recognized as one of the top American sailors of the last century. So an amazing person. Met him up on the farm, and I interviewed him for a story, and then he interviewed me and invited me to come sailing with him back in the early 1990s. So I interviewed with Roger, met him in South Africa, and we sailed 6,000 miles from Cape Town, South Africa to Ushuaia, Argentina. And that was the first time I had ever done any ocean sailing. So that was a great way to break in on one of the longest open water passages in the world. And we sailed on his beautiful boat named Cloud 9, 57-foot Bowman ketch. This was a photograph I took in Tuktoyaktuk up in northern Canada while we were doing the Northwest Passage. And I love the name Tuktoyaktuk. Kids love that name and they have a hard time saying it, so I usually pronounce it Tuk Toyota Truck because they have a lot of fun with that. So this is Cloud 9, beautiful. You can see the ketch rig, 2 masts, 4 sails, all beautifully put away. Roger was a naval officer, and so we did everything by the book, and we just always had great sails. Hardly anything went wrong in all of our miles together that we sailed. And we just had a tremendous team when we were out there on the ocean. This is a photograph I took sailing across the South Atlantic. I was hanging upside down from the top of the mast, about 100 feet off the water. And one of my favorite photos, you can actually see it in the background, maybe from the intro when I was talking. And we sailed with the spinnaker for almost 2 weeks off the coast of Africa in the trade winds. And this was one of the most magical times that I've ever had in my life. as we were sailing across the Atlantic for 38 days. We also sailed into southern Chile and went into some of the great fjords in the Beagle Channel. And this is one that wasn't even named on our chart that we had. And we kept hearing all of the glaciers calving off into the water and just echoing. And so we named it Biotimbalis, or the Bay of the Kettle Drums. And again, one of the most magical experiences. You can see the mountains in the background there. Right from where we were, we went from sea level to 8,000 feet, just boom, just like that. So again, magical experiences at the southern end of the world. And Roger introduced me to the big elements of sailing out there. He didn't just want to go to the normal places that everybody wanted to go. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. He just wanted to go to the polar regions and sail. And so I wanted to do that too. I love cold weather. So Roger introduced me to these places like sailing to Antarctica, as we did in 1992. We sailed across the Antarctic Circle farther than any private yacht had ever done, private American yacht had ever done up to that point. And then we just got our butts kicked trying to sail back north, and we had to take shelter at Palmer Station in Antarctica after getting beaten around for 3 days in a storm with winds 40 to 70 knots, waves about 35 to 40 feet, and icebergs and ice all over the place. It was pretty brutal out there. This is what you see when you're out in the ocean, especially in these southern realms. You have roll clouds, cigar clouds, quick passing cold fronts, fast changing elements that can just change in just moments, and you have to be ready for almost anything. This is a photograph I call End of Times, and it kind of fits the times we live in right now. But you see everything out there, and it's always fun and a challenge to try to adjust to conditions. And of course, the ocean. This was near Cape Horn. We had experienced over 90 knots of wind there. And when I was on ocean watch, and I saw my friend Horacio Rosell, who checked in with us from Argentina tonight, we had 105 knots of wind that the lighthouse keeper clocked there at Cape Horn when we were down there taking shelter in a hurricane hole and rode that out. So these are the big winds and waves that roll in these polar regions, and you just kind of have to survive them. These waves really sort of look like rolling mountains coming at you down there. And again, somehow you just operate as a team, you adjust to the conditions, and you just try your best to get through it. Well, when I went with Roger in 1992, this was the first iceberg that I ever saw, and it gets your attention right away when you see these big tabular icebergs down there. You know, as big as a city, really as big as a small city. And they're really your friends on these nice days like this, but when the wind kicks up, they start calving ice, and you don't want to be anywhere near them. They can be up to 400, 500 feet high, and of course, 1,000 feet deep. So you have to be very careful around the icebergs, but they're also very beautiful. And as a professional photographer, this is why I wanted to go to the Antarctic region and also to the Arctic, was to photograph these spectacular places that you have to really work hard to get to, work hard as a team, and the reward is you get to take these beautiful photographs, and then also go out to the penguin colonies like here near Palmer Station in Antarctica. These are Adelie penguins. You can tell by the white ring around the eye. They eat krill and regurgitate the food. And unfortunately, Adelies are very much threatened right now on the Antarctic Peninsula, which, like the Arctic, is one of the fastest warming regions on the planet right now. And with all the changes in their food supplies, it will be very interesting to watch what's happening with the penguin colonies down there in Antarctica. But this was the first time I really got to work with scientists in Palmer Station and get out with them, see how they operate. And I decided that I wanted more of this. And science has always been a big interest of mine, and I wanted to do more. So I started not only writing about sailing, but also about ocean issues, conservation, what scientists were seeing with some of the changes in the world. So we hadn't even left Antarctica, And Roger already was talking about the Northwest Passage, because that's what you do when you're in polar regions. You just keep talking about where else you might want to go sailing. So we were sitting down there in Antarctica, and Roger brings up the Northwest Passage, and why don't we give that a shot? And so here's a map of the passage, and I have a little graphic that's going to come up after this, but on the right side of your screen, you can see the intersection of Roald Amundson's route from Europe from 1903 to 1906. We wanted to follow his route, attempt to, and in 1994, we headed north. We got the boat to Halifax in Nova Scotia, actually Lunenburg for this early voyage, and sailed into the Maritimes and really enjoyed that, and then to St. Anthony in Newfoundland. And then you go out around the ice edge into the North Atlantic and then start peeling up the west coast of Greenland north with the warming water and the current that starts melting the ice and opens up a lead. Once you're about 500-600 miles north of the Arctic Circle, then you head west into Canadian waters, across Baffin Bay, and the Northwest Passage really begins. Then you head south through the whole archipelago of islands, and then if you're lucky enough, you go across the entire north shore of the continent of North America, eventually through the Bering Strait and the Aleutians and into the Pacific. So that's about a 7,000-mile voyage. No American vessel had ever done that in history, so we were attempting to be the first ones. And we'll see how this graphic goes.
Ocean. From the east,
Can you hear the audio?
Up the west
Okay,
coast
good.
of Greenland and over the Arctic Circle. Then proceeds west across Baffin Bay and enters the channels of the Canadian Arctic along the northern coast of North America. This route eventually leads south through the Bering Strait to the warmer waters of the Pacific Ocean.
So there's what it looks like. So that's a little taste of what it looks like. My bunk was right under that bow area, and literally sailing on the ocean, especially in rough seas, is about as close as you can get to being an astronaut. You're pulling G's, your stomach leaves you. It's kind of an amazing experience, and it's a heck of a way to try to sleep. I can tell you that for sure. So in 1994, we took off from the Northwest Passage. People always ask me how I trained to do this for the cold, and I read a lot of Amundsen. Amundsen was kind of my hero and sailing mentor as an explorer, and he talked a lot about sleeping in the north with his windows open and working outside with his hands. So I decided to tear apart my little cabin in the winter of 1993 barehanded and put it back together again, and that's what I did. So I worked barehanded in the cold, and a lot of people say, well, where were you? And I said, well, I was in Northwest Iowa, with the third highest average wind speed in the United States and very, very cold temperatures. And so it's a really good place to train. So in 1994, we took off for the Northwest Passage for the first time. And of course, part of that is sailing up the west coast of Greenland, through and into some of the most beautiful fjords you've ever seen in your life, and glowing blue icebergs, and just absolute magic. And the reward for all the hard work and sailing is always these beautiful photographs. We dodged little bergy bits as we worked up north along the coast, waiting for the ice and the pack ice to slowly melt out of Baffin Bay so that we could cross into Canada. And then along the way, we would stop in little communities, meet people, and explore. Close passes by icebergs and nice days like here near Disco Island. And that's my friend Jeff Pope on the bow. Jeff Pope was the explorer I was talking about, who is from Duluth area, who had a boat called Sheila Yates, and sailed her to Greenland. And that's a story I might tell you live in person in Grand Marais sometime. But his boat sunk that he built off the coast of Greenland, and they were very, very lucky to be rescued in a storm up there. But Jeff was 81 years old when he sailed to the Arctic with us. And he was a spry 81-year-old and a great helmsman, and full of stories, and he was our chief storyteller aboard Cloud 9. There you can get a sense of the icebergs. Icebergs were all around us all the time, and again, on the nice days, they were your friends, and in stormy weather, you just try to stay away from them. This is Jakob, Sha'ban, Glacier, and Fjord here. It's the largest ice fjord in the Northern Hemisphere and produces about 10% of the icebergs in the Northern Hemisphere. Probably produced the iceberg that sunk the Titanic. And it's also the fastest receding ice fjord now, and has receded back some 20 or 30 miles now from where it originally was some 30 years ago. So, and I have all sorts of charts and graphs about this that I can share another time. But anyway, Jakob, Sha'ban, Glacier, and this ice fjord is one of the most beautiful and spectacular places that I've ever been. And you can take a direct flight right in there now to view the glacier, which is kind of amazing. And so we can hopefully have some questions about that also. These beautiful little towns, like here in Sisimiut, just across the Arctic Circle, is just an amazing little town. They're all beautiful with these little colored houses and villages and churches, and they're really fun to explore and try to go find some fresh food in the villages, which has maybe just been caught by a fisherman, and have a nice feast on board the vessel. So making new friends everywhere. Finally, we got so far up north that we got to Devil's Thumb. You can see the rock outcrop right above the bow of Cloud 9. That's an old landmark that the fishermen, hunters, and gatherers, the indigenous Greenlandic people, used to know that that was a safe place to head west, directly west over toward Canada, because that's traditionally where the pack ice would split, the northern pack ice from the middle pack. And so we used that landmark because remember, this was pretty much before all of the high-tech stuff that we have these days that everybody's using. So we were using landmarks and fishermen, historical data, and the Danish Navy for our information. So we got the information that we could cross. We made a very fast passage, rough seas again, but we split the pack ice perfectly. There's Jeff at the helm and Roger on watch with him. And we were always tethered in these conditions for sure. And rough sailing, but fast sailing over to Canada. And again, here's Roger on the right there, and Jeff Pope, both have passed now. These were just two men that I'm telling you shaped my life and were so much fun to be around and so inspiring. Great warriors, great adventurers, and sorely missed in my life and so many others. Fun to sail with. So here's our actual chart. You can see where we crossed from Greenland on the right into Lancaster Sound on the left side of your screen. We're now 600 miles over the Arctic Circle, and we were going to enter Lancaster Sound, and that's really where the Northwest Passage kind of begins. These were some venticular clouds that we saw right near the entry, and we knew that we were not in for a warm summer bit of sailing for sure. People often ask what were the average temperatures up there, and I would say on average about, say, 26 to 40 to 45 maybe in the summertime. That's sort of regular summertime temperatures. Of course, you're oftentimes wet and getting bombed by ice pellets and that kind of stuff in those conditions too. So here were the first three graves of the Franklin expedition. This was in Erebus Bay, about 300 miles in. And this were the first three deaths of the Franklin expedition during their infamous voyage of 1843 to 45, where the first crew members died. They were the lucky ones, as I always say, because all 129 men would perish during that voyage. You can see now there's another little boat there. So there's Cloud 9, and there's a smaller boat. And that was a French boat called Back of the Moon with 3 crew members aboard. So in 1994, there were exactly 2 boats and 9 people attempting the Northwest Passage in the entire world. There are more people that summit Mount Everest every year than have sailed through the Northwest Passage in history. So it's still a very rare feat to even get up there, let alone get through the Northwest Passage. So this is where the history and the gravity of the situation really took hold with us, that we knew that we were in for some tough going from here on, because this is where we started entering the ice. Of course, the Franklin expedition, 2 vessels, they got trapped in the ice, the Erebus and Terror, 129 men. Their vessels were too large. They had poor clothing, you know, bad food, wouldn't eat the local and indigenous food that was offered to them, and, you know, kind of typical British expedition, stubborn right to their death. And that's kind of the way it was. But people learned a lot, future explorers learned a lot from this expedition, because there wasn't any internet at the time. And so other expeditions were launched to go out and look for what happened. And of course, eventually the Northwest Passage was discovered and transited by Roald Amundsen 1903 to 1906. Of course, 1994 was a bad ice year. Ice was still pretty normal at the polar region during that time. We got stuck in the ice. We were trapped for almost 2 weeks. We got separated from back of the moon. We didn't even know what happened to them. We were just fighting it ourselves. You can see we're tied to an ice floe here and just trying to survive as we could. This is what the pack ice looked like in 1994 that we encountered. We could not get out of it. We couldn't get through it. We were a 57-foot fiberglass sailboat, and we had really dense pack ice at 60 to 90% ice most of the time, and we need like 10 to 20% kind of open flows, more water than ice, in order to go through this. You would have needed an icebreaker. So we were just fighting it, and we just found that we could not make any headway to the south into the southern channels near Resolute. We were drifting with the pack ice. We couldn't find any open leads. And in any expedition, whether it's climbing mountains or sailing in the poles, you have a go and you have a no-go date. And we were reaching our no-go date in August, late August, and we just said, we got to get out of here, or we're going to get frozen in for the season, and it's going to be bad for Cloud9 and our crew. So we escaped to the north. We got word from the Canadian Coast Guard. We found a lead the same way that we came back in through Lancaster Sound, and escaped from this predicament we were in the ice. And in 1994, we retreated some 3,000 miles all the way back out of the Arctic, the way we came, back down the west coast of Greenland. We rode out a hurricane in Prince Christian Sound to the southern tip, and then we followed the hurricane all the way across the northern Atlantic and sailed into Cork, Ireland in late September. So that was our voyage in 1994. I did a lot of other sailing with Roger in between after this. 13 years passed. We talked about going back to the Northwest Passage because Roger had done so many other expeditions, but the one thing he didn't accomplish was the Northwest Passage. And so we kept talking about it, and in 2007, Roger was 75 years old. The world had changed. We now had internet. We had access to information from universities, and I've been following what was going on with the loss of ice in the northern polar region. And I wanted to really see, from a standpoint of ground truthing as a citizen scientist, if what the scientists were saying was correct about climate change having this big effect in the north. Roger thought it was going to be doable, and he wanted to give it one last shot, and we said, let's go. Roger said, this is going to be a business trip. There's going to be no messing around in a lot of Greenlandic villages having fun. We're just going to hit it, man, and we're going to do this thing. So we took off in 2007, past one of our favorite villages in Upernavik, and this was an area actually which is sort of the last outpost where you can provision, get some information, and this is what we did. We sailed hard north up to Upernavik, and at this point we stopped and we actually met a Norwegian vessel there named Jotun Arctic, and it was someone that Roger had met previously, and they had a climate scientist with them. They were doing some ice research along the coast of Greenland, and they said that we wouldn't have any problem crossing Baffin Bay and into northern Canada. So we got really good information there, and we just took off and went. We had a little problem with our radar. Radar is really important, especially in these polar regions, because you get a lot of fog. And when the wind's not blowing a lot of times it's just really foggy because the air temperature and the ocean temp is about the same. And you just get into these areas where you just have dense fog and you can't see the icebergs. Maybe you can, maybe not with your radar. So we had to poke along a lot of the way. As you can see here in the fog. We thought our radar was working. As it turned out, it wasn't. So I guess we got a little bit lucky there in 2007. We had some big seas, some good following seas, and some good sailing across Baffin Bay. Entered Lancaster Sound, and the obvious thing that was missing in 2007 was ice. And it was a warming trend that had been going on there now for a couple of years, and 2007 was a very, very unusual year, and the pack ice had just completely disintegrated from Lancaster Sound. So we just proceeded, and we got back exactly to the place that we were in 1994, and this is what we were met with. Instead of dense pack ice, it was more like being out on a boat on a calm day on, Lake Superior or Lake Okoboji. We had calm sunny days, big high pressure, and almost no ice, and we were just absolutely dumbfounded by what we were seeing. So it confirmed what we were suspecting with the scientific data, but even more so. And we were actually very saddened to see the lack of ice there. But the polar bears now were mostly on the land, or they were having to swim to go find their food because the seals were out on the ice floes, which were now a long ways away as the ice receded farther to the north. So they were just as confused as we were at the time. But what it did allow us to do was sail fast. And so we entered the southern fjords, and now we were following Roald Amundsen. We were going to do his route and follow it to a T. So of course, Roald Amundsen, the famous Norwegian explorer, went through the Northwest Passage in 1903 to 1906, overwintered, imagine that, 3 years frozen into the ice in northern Canada. So in this little place called Joa Haven. The name of their boat was Joa, so they named it. They were having some trouble and almost lost their vessel where they went aground, almost getting to this little harbor. And they had to unload a bunch of crates and all kinds of things from their vessel in order to lighten her up so they could get off when they were aground and lighten their load. And finally, one of the crew members said that he spied the finest little harbor in the world, and they sailed in there. They knew they couldn't go any further, and they froze into the ice there. And so they named this little area Joa Haven. And they learned to speak the language. They met a lot of locals over the next couple of years. And we sailed in there 100 years later, and we dropped anchor in exactly the same place as Roald Amundsen did 100 years previously. It was just amazing. Many of them had not seen any vessel for many, many years coming in there. So we got to know many of the locals and just had a great time in their community, learning how they were living there and many of their cultural ways. So that's what's fun about exploring, really, for me, is going and meeting the locals and seeing how they live and making new friends. Speaking of friends, we also met some other sailors. And I'll just touch on a couple. These were the Wild Vikings. And maybe some of you have read some of their tales. They ended up getting arrested by the Mounties and eventually locked up for a while. Their boat was named Berserk. So they were 3 sailors and 2 Hells Angels, although there's only 4 of them there. One of them was a fugitive, and he was hiding out on an island with a pup tent, a bottle of whiskey, and a handgun, while the other guys went into the communities and just caused all kinds of trouble. So we met up with them, and great guys, but they weren't very respectful of the northern communities, and eventually got locked up and deported. Another story that I'll tell you in person when I come to Grand Marais sometime. But their boat was named Berserk. And they would eventually be deported, their boat chained to the pier. Another crew would come in and sail her out of the country, but then they would fly back into Alaska, sail her back into Canadian waters, and plant the Norwegian flag on an island in northern Canada for Norway. They eventually sailed all the way to Antarctica, where the captain decided he wanted to take an ATV to the South Pole. So he took off with a guide to go do that, while the boat got caught in a storm and sank, and the entire crew died. And so it's a very sad, sad story, but also I think there was a little karma there, because they were very disrespectful of, I think, of the traditions of exploring, and especially the communities. There's another gentleman I met here, Jeffrey Allison, who was with us when we were in one of the Canadian communities, Cambridge Bay, and he was interviewed for the Wall Street Journal story, same as we were, about what was going on in the passage. And he was complaining that it was just too easy. There wasn't any ice to fight through like the old explorers had. And he was really mad about global warming, because there wasn't any ice for him to fight up there in the north, and really kind of pissed off at the world. So, well, you better be humble also when you're sailing in these remote regions, because his vessel, named Luck Dragon, was caught in a storm in the Bering Sea as he tried to escape on the western side of the Arctic, and they had to jump into the ocean and grab a knotted line from a fishing boat and scuttle their vessel and live for another day. They thought the vessel had sunk. It ended up floating around, and someone who was beachcombing in Alaska years later found Luck Dragon ashore, and it became a big international story then. But again, always be humble when you're out there in these remote places, because you may not run into ice, but there's also many opportunities to be in storms and bad conditions out there. We did not have that in 2007 as we went through. We had a lot of high pressure and beautiful days like this. We carried extra fuel so we could motor in weather windows, but this is what we had day after day, a lot of high pressure, very little ice. And in the summer of 2007, we emerged, rounded Point Barrow, sailed south and recrossed the Arctic Circle, and 6,694 miles we sailed, and we became the first American sailors in history to do that east-west Amundsen's historical Northwest Passage. So that was just an amazing, amazing feat. And we thought we got a little assist. So I don't like to throw in too many graphs and such, but you can kind of see what's happening decade by decade in the Arctic with ice loss. And up on the top, you can see our 1994 voyage. There were still about 7 million square kilometers of ice in the far north to our northern polar ice cap. And you can see by 2007, you can see what's happened with the ice. And of course, 2012 was the big tipping point. But 2007 still holds the, I think, tied for second or something in the record books for loss of ice. And so that's what's happening year after year. So I personally witnessed about a 40% loss of ice in just those 13 short years to our northern polar ice cap. And it still has not recovered. So there's more first year ice and there's less multi-year ice in the Arctic. And so it's getting into a freeze-thaw situation, very similar to what's going on in the Great Lakes or right here at Okoboji, where there's thinner first-year ice and less of the multi-year thicker ice. And so this is what it looks like now, our great northern polar ice cap at the end of the melt season. This is what it looks like by satellite. And you can see the Northwest Passage just to the south over the top. This was 2012, which is the record loss of ice. So lots of changes going on in the far north. So this all led me afterwards to want to get involved in more science and more documentary photography. And so we had a lot of people following our Cloud 9 voyage, and I was asked by Captain Mark Trader and David Rockefeller to get involved, being the documentary videographer and ice expert and photographer for the Around the Americas expedition, a 28,000-mile voyage to create awareness about ocean and sea issues around North and South America. So we were to spend about 400 days at sea in 2009 and 10. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, actually right now this past week. We worked with NASA, NOAA, MIT Scripps, 13 different countries, lots of different universities in both hemispheres. And we had a K through 8 curriculum designed by the National Science Foundation, working with the Applied Physics Lab and others at the University of Washington in Seattle. So this was big time science voyage. We refit a 64-foot Bruce Roberts designed vessel with a lot of science supplied by the physics lab. And then we were trained as citizen scientists, along with scientists we had on board, to do all the different science throughout the Americas. So we were meeting with children, obviously, where we could, to try to inspire them to become the next scientists or educators that might change the world and inspire the next generations. We were doing climate research. We were retrieving and launching Arctic buoys for the International Arctic Buoy Program. And we were observing a lot of wildlife along the way, working with NASA on cloud observations also, and ground truthing satellites for them, studying aerosols and radiation coming off the ocean, radiated heat. So it was a pretty fascinating voyage for us in so many ways. And you can see, if your computer screen allows you, our voyage starting from Seattle and now going clockwise through the Northwest Passage, west to east, and then all the way down south through the Atlantic, around Cape Horn, and all the way back up to Seattle. 51 port stops, right around 400 days. And in every port stop, we did science and education, met with kids, met with the university scientists, and I think we talked to thousands and thousands of school children along the way. So this is what Ocean Watch looked like now, 64 feet. You can see the Google camera on the right side on the arm. It took over 10,000 images every day continuously, and some poor researcher is probably still looking through those things at the University of Washington somewhere. We had carbon fiber kayaks, we had satellite communication, we blogged every day, and we filed over 200 stories internationally on our voyage around the Americas with Captain Mark Schrader, a great sailor from the state of Nebraska. You know, we got to get Nebraska, Minnesota, and Iowa represented all over the place. So, and our writer Herb McCormick was from Newport, Rhode Island, one of my very best friends in the world, and he and I did stories throughout the entire passage. This is what we did also. We had kids out to the boat. We met them in classrooms. We introduced them to our curriculum. We had onboard educators who would sometimes sail with us, but mostly they would meet us in ports. On the lower right, that's Roxanne Nenenga, multilingual educator who was, this picture was taken in Peru. And so this was just an example of what we would do. We would meet kids, get them out to the boat, and try to inspire them. They could, you know, they could sit in the captain's chair and look at our computers and check everything out and kind of see what it was like to be on an ocean-going research vessel. And we were an active NOAA weather vessel also, by the way. This is what it looked like underway as we headed north. You can see our spinnaker that was built by North Sails and donated for the voyage. It was beautiful. We always tried to fly that if we could in areas, especially if we were coming into a port or around an area like here where we were getting near Juneau, Alaska. Of course, rough sailing. I was always clipped into that blue safety line there as I was working the deck, taking photographs along the way. Would have loved to have had a drone. Drones hadn't been invented yet, darn it, but I'll get back up there the next time and be flying my drones all over the place on the next voyage. But this is how I lived, with a harness and working that blue line and taking photographs in 64 feet, which was basically my life. And of course, we ended up getting up near Barrow, and we started meeting some sea ice, and we found a nice lead along the shore. We worked that lead in shallow water all the way into Point Barrow, and we arrived in Point Barrow near the end of July, and now we would be waiting patiently for the pack ice to start melting to open up the leads along the north shore of Alaska, which is really one of the most dangerous places in the west to east voyage, because you're completely exposed on that north shore of Alaska. It's very shallow along the coast. We drew 9 feet of water, so there were no real good ports for us to go into at all. And so this was a dangerous time for us. So we waited and waited till we had a pretty good clear weather window before we left. Of course, when you're in Barrow, which is now called Utqiagvik, a lot of the shorelines are eroding quickly and they're losing many of their villages and having to reinforce their shorelines as the permafrost melts away. It's causing a lot of problems in the far north because they literally live at that interface with land, water, and ice, because to accomplish their traditional cultural hunting and fishing, they need to be in these locations, and it's causing tremendous food insecurity in villages in the north. But this is the area of the bowhead whale. And the bowhead whale is a fascinating story. We got to meet the foremost experts in the world, the bowhead whale. We met also hunters and multi-generational native hunters. So it was really a fascinating time to meet Craig George and Harry Brower in the north and get to go out with them to see the bowhead whales and also be along them, along their migratory route, along that north shore of Alaska. So they come up through the Bering Sea, and of course, into the Chukchi Sea. They round the corner and go into the Beaufort Sea. And these are very, very sensitive areas. Again, it's that interface between land and water where all of the wildlife exists. Migrating waterfowl, seals, walrus, polar bears, lots of whales. And this is exactly the area that's potentially going to be opened up for oil and gas drilling. And as a conservationist, this is something that I'm working very hard to have these areas protected with many, many other people across the planet. So very interesting story. The bowhead whale, brought back from the brink of extinction, was almost hunted to extinction by the Yankee whalers, mostly for women's fashion industry, as the baleen was used for women's corsets. On another barrier island near there, we met George DeVokie, and George is an ornithologist who studies a little bird called the black guillemot, and he's been living out there alone for over 40 years now on this barrier island, studying this little black bird. And he started noticing something after a couple decades, that their breeding season was longer, and it was longer by 5 days per decade, he found. And what was going on with that? What signal were they getting that he wasn't picking up on? Well, after a lot of research over a couple of years, what he found was they were picking up on the same signal as the melting snow and ice 5 days earlier per decade along the northern shore of Alaska. So George didn't go there to study climate change. These little birds actually taught him that climate change was real. And so the black guillemot was his bird of study. He lived in this little shack there. He used to live in the tent, but he had to move into the shack because the polar bears were now swimming because the pack ice was receding, and they were swimming out farther into the ocean, running into his island, literally, and then eating his birds and the eggs and attempting to eat him. So he had to move into the shack there so that he could get away from the polar bears. This is what the black guillemot looks like. And he's been studying them. Again, I think this will be something like his 47th year there on the island this summer, studying the black guillemot. When you ask George if he believes in climate change, he says, no, you don't believe in climate change. It's just real. You know, it's happening, it's science. But I do believe in polar bears. And I did not see a polar bear for 28 years until the polar bear started swimming as the ice receded. So it's the animals that were teaching George about the changes in the Arctic. And now they're swimming as the pack ice recedes more out into the ocean and again, out into these communities and barrier islands. We proceeded now east. I was up on the mast where I always am, looking for open shore leads and taking photos along the way and relaying information back down on the deck to Herb and to Mark Schrader, who would relay the information back to Dave Logan, who was at the helm. We ran into just a little bit of ice, about 60 miles, which was really fun for us to try to navigate. And that was in Amundsen Gulf. So we navigated through the ice. It's pretty dangerous because we had a lot of under hull instrumentation that we had to be really careful of in the ice. And along the way, we stopped in Tuktoyaktuk, where I got to meet some native hunters and spent some time in their hunting camp. And this hunter fisherman was just cleaning up some whitefish and was hanging the fish up there to dry in the smoke shack. I spent a lot of time with him, eating some raw beluga whale and a lot of fish guts and raw fish, and kind of learning what their traditions were all about. And it was making me eating this Bipsy stew here. At first was giving me a bit of a gag reflex. And he thought that was really funny. He would just hold out his knife and I'd kind of suck it off there. And I had a hard time swallowing it. I didn't know what to do with it, you know? And he thought it was hilarious. So he took me to their ice cave, which was a real honor to get to go with him. So 30 feet below the ground is a permafrost ice cave with 19 rooms in it. And this is where the traditional hunters and fishermen store their food. And so I went into his family's ice cave and he told me multi-generational oral histories about their families there in northern Canada and about how they all arrived and met and their families and how they lived for years. And it was just fascinating. So this is what permafrost looks like. It's literally right at that interface with the Arctic Ocean and the community of Tuktoyaktuk. We proceeded again. We used weather windows. There was just a little bit of pack ice left at this point. It was no problem for us to navigate, negotiate. So we were just running through the channels at this point. We were sailing when we had good breeze, but in these channels, a lot of times we were just motoring along. And again, the beauty of the Arctic is what I love. You can just see this beautiful blue like no place in the world, and the ice is all kinds of different colors. And then you meet other explorers like Kevin Toney, who are navigating the Northwest Passage in a 17-foot open boat. And they were on holiday from the war in Afghanistan. They were two special forces guys and officers. And you can see it's 26 degrees and they're in flip-flops and sandals. And they had just had an experience with a bear on shore and almost got killed. And they were just laughing and giggling and just hucking it up and just thought this was a jolly good time going through the Northwest Passage. So these are the sort of folks that you couldn't meet otherwise any other place in the world, and they just kind of appear when you're in the Arctic. Of course, this is another reason why I went, was to get to see all of the wildlife, and especially polar bears, healthy polar bears in the far north on the ice pack where they should be, where they can catch seals and eat like they have for millennia. And so these bears were curious. We kind of motored up close and shut off the engine and just drifted by. And they were curious. I got some great photos. I was up on the mast. And this is a female and probably about a 2-year-old cub. And they eventually swam away, but we got a really close-up personal look. And quite frankly, this made it for me. The whole Northwest Passage was to see these two beautiful polar bears up close and personal. And of course, the beauty of the Arctic, this is what took me out into these places in the first place as a professional photographer, was to go and try to capture beautiful images in these remote regions of the world. And I know we have a lot of problems going on in the world, both with our environment and with our personal environments with coronavirus, but the world is still out there. It will be out there. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and we need to keep our dreams alive. And that's why exploring this earth is so beautiful, whether it's right in your backyards around Grand Marais, in the far north, the Arrowhead. You guys are just in a beautiful region up there, and we all are. And it's good in these times to think about these beautiful places and set goals to get back out there, explore, and also to try to protect with both local and global conservation. We finally ended up popping back out into Baffin Bay, where all these, again, these beautiful massive icebergs reside. And then we started hauling the mail, as Mark would say. We started flying, full sail, and really started heading south, because now you're in danger of nighttime on the east side. Days get shorter quickly. You get a night and you're in iceberg country. And icebergs and nighttime sailing do not mix well. I can tell you that from a lot of experience. And so we just wanted to get out of there as fast as we could. So we headed south. And of course, taking these beautiful pictures, we had a full moon rise that was kind of morphed a little bit in the background with icebergs around us, and spectacular. We started seeing some northern lights a little bit for the first time because we were seeing a night finally. And again, digital photography is wonderful. I could take some images even in these low light conditions that I could never have taken before when I first started doing photography and sailing. So photography has changed a lot. Videography has changed a lot. It allows you to take more images in very, very sensitive light conditions. So that's another thing that I love about sailing now. Beautiful sailing, amazing times in the far north, the people, the friendships, the teamwork, all of it together. This is where I really find my spirit. You know, if I'm spiritual at all, it's out in nature, and that's where I just love to be. And that's where it all happens for me, is in these beautiful places, and that's where I feel it. Well, I have to tell you, I hadn't really thought about it a lot, but we got near the Arctic Circle, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was becoming the first American sailor to ever sail the Northwest Passage in both directions. And, you know, this kind of humble Iowa, you know, small town boy was getting this honor to be able to do this. And it was really through my friendships and all of the folks and teamwork, and Roger Swanson especially, that this happened. And all the way back in history, reading about Roald Amundsen and Fridtjof Nansen and so many of these others that blazed the trail before and that lost their lives in the north. And it also dawned on me that maybe I had kind of bridged some eras, that this golden era of exploration might have come to a close. This golden era of Amundsen, you know, like, let's do it, you know, let's be the big first out there. And that this golden era had ended, and this new era that involves the study and change of the Earth's climate was just really beginning. And that's where we're at right now. It's not really good enough to go out to just sail the waters. We need to be advocates. We need to be advocates for the waters that we sail in, for our local lands and public lands that we recreate in. And this is my goal now, and what I hope to leave as a legacy with so many others as a conservationist, is to work hard to protect these places and to try to provide awareness for the next generation so that they can go out and explore and have the same types of opportunities that I have had. So with that, I thank you very, very much. I'll turn it back over to you guys for some Q&A, and we'll see what happens from there. So thank you all very much. Am I back? Are we back live with audio?
I believe we are, right, Justice?
Awesome. Thank you, Greg.
Sure are.
David, that was fantastic. And we do indeed have questions, as we should, after some great stories. A first question, so tell us a little bit about how you stay warm and relatively dry sailing in the Arctic. I mean, how do you do that?
One of the things that you have to do is you develop a routine. So one of the things about sailing in cold weather is you're very confined, and it's really dangerous moving around the deck. So you can't really move around a whole lot. You spend a lot of time in the cockpit. So I developed kind of an isometric routine, doing a lot of push-ups and dips and isometric squats, you know, lots of those types of things. Like anytime you're feeling cold, you know, get down and do 20 push-ups, you know, do some dips, find different ways to move around, lots of squats, get your blood flowing. On our Antarctica trip, I don't think Roger ever recovered from that. Roger, I think, was close to getting some frostbite in his toes. And he said that every time from then on that he got in cold weather, his feet just ached forever. And so it does have a lasting effect. I actually ended up in the hospital in Boston after our Around the Americas trip through the voyage. They thought that I might be having some blood clotting issues. And that's another problem that can develop when you just stand for these long periods of time without enough circulation. So it does take a toll on the body, but yeah, staying warm is the hardest. And I took a lot of, besides sailing gear, I like rock climbing and mountain expedition gear, because it's a little more fluid to work in with more articulated kind of sleeves and movements. And I also like to wear slightly oversized jackets because I keep my camera gear dry under my coat. And I tend to use smaller camera bodies so that I can pull them right out of my coat to shoot pictures and then zip back up. And always have, you know, like backup sets of clothing, because you are going to get wet, you're going to get soaked, and you just need to be able to rotate after watches.
So another question, less about you and more about the equipment. So this is a kind of a combination of questions, but you know, did the boats have special reinforcements? You said fiberglass, but I mean, and you know, how were the boats outfitted to be able to sail into these kind of environments?
I guarantee that Cloud9 was built for blue water passage making, not going through ice. She was built for the Cape Town to Rio race, as a matter of fact. So long blue water passages. She was a fast blue water passage maker. And in fact, her sister vessel set many records and sailed in a number of Whitbreads. So she was built for that. So the advantage with that, yeah, you can sail fast when you needed to. Disadvantage, fiberglass. Although being an older vessel and built the way she was a very sturdy hull. Speaking of reinforcements, Roger being the inventor that he was, he sewed together literally some snowmobile tracks that we put on the bow of Cloud9 as a bra around the bow, and then we strapped the snowmobile tracks up onto the tow rail around the deck, and we could push through a little ice, which we did a few times in some bad times that way. But even so, after that voyage, in fact, both voyages, but especially in '94, Roger had to unfortunately completely redo all of his gel coat and fiberglass, and everything was really badly beaten up after that voyage. So on the other hand, Ocean Watch was a steel vessel, and steel vessels are much better in the ice. We felt very good about Ocean Watch in the ice, and had a much more powerful engine too. And for any farmers who might be watching, we had a Marinized John Deere engine called a lugger. And so that's what we used, and that was also our generator aboard Ocean Watch. So we were much better off on Ocean Watch, and our heat actually worked, whereas Cloud9, we had very little heat aboard.
And where are the two boats now, do you know?
Oh yeah, the Ocean Watch is in Seattle, and Mark has sold her to another young explorer who is hoping to go do potentially another Around the Americas voyage a year from now or something. I've kind of lost track now of Cloud9, unfortunately, because she's been sold a number of times, and so I'm not sure where she is in the world right now. And I'll have to see if I can find out from maybe Stephen Swanson, Roger's son, but I've lost track. Unfortunately, Cloud9 should be purchased and put in some kind of maritime museum, because she's a very historical vessel for many of the passages, and especially the Northwest Passage voyage that Roger did.
Great. So speaking of boats, in 1994, you met a French vessel, I think called maybe Backside of the Moon.
Back of the Moon.
Oh yeah. So what happened? You said we didn't hear what happened. What happened?
Well, what happened was we had decided when we were sitting in Erebus Bay that we would use our knowledge together. You know, that we would try to proceed together as a team. We had very primitive GPS at the time that could give us kind of our lat long. And then we would transfer that to paper charts. They didn't have any of that. And literally your compass up there, if you're making, if you're turning, going around ice or whatever, your compass will just start spinning. And it's really hard to get any kind of bearing. So we decided to kind of work as a team up there to get through the ice. Well, the ice got so thick and we both got trapped in it, and it pushed them away in a different direction. The pack ice is moving constantly in different directions. And so they got pushed one way, we got pushed another way, and we never saw them again. And so radio communication is notoriously bad in the north, because you're in 24-hour daylight. Ham radios don't work well. Anyway, we got separated. We ended up getting back in communication with them after some time, and they had gotten spit out the other side back into Lancaster Sound, where we got trapped near Resolute, near Griffith Island. And so they took shelter again, and we finally got them on the radio and made some contact. And we ended up on our retreat out of there, meeting them in a bay near Pond Inlet, and we had dinner together. Before we departed, we sailed out together into Baffin Bay, and they eventually, of course, took off to sail back to France, and we proceeded on to Ireland. So we did get to see them again, and we have stayed in contact, and there are some very brave souls on that boat.
Great stories. So how about a story about, was there any what you might call closest call for you and the team on one of the journeys?
Yeah, closest call was easily in that storm system down in Antarctica that we had. We had 7 low pressure systems within 600 miles of us. They were so densely packed, and we were right around the Antarctic Circle, and that was one of Roger's goals. He wanted to sail below the Antarctic Circle, and we did that. And we encountered a lot of ice, but it was on the way back sailing north. We were trying to figure out where to make landfall, whether the British Faraday Station, maybe Palmer Station, we weren't quite sure. But all of a sudden the wind built, and we were literally 55 miles from Palmer Station. And as I always say, you can drive that in under an hour, right? But all of a sudden we got slammed with headwinds of 40 to 70 knots, so imagine 80 miles an hour, and the seas built, and we were in nasty ice conditions. So we had visibility of less than, say, 500 feet. We were tracking icebergs by radar. And whenever we would start seeing the ice building up, we knew that we were near icebergs. And so we just positioned ourselves within these icebergs and battled it out for 3 days. And we slowly lost all of our instruments. We lost all of our heat on board. The engine was getting shaky. Our generator quit, and we were in bad shape. We were really close to losing it. One of our crew members did. Pretty much. Roger had sores all over his hands and wrists. One of our crew members had boils all over his face. You literally could not lift your head up above the Dodger when you were on watch, or it would rip your face off with the ice pellets, and without ski goggles on. So it was a nasty condition. And if you can imagine this, we were back a lot of times in the aft steering station, and you were getting literally taking bow shots that were going up over the second spreader and landing on top of you like a bathtub of freezing water while you were on watch, and dodging ice, and laid over on our side. It was a bad way. So after 3 days of just heaving to and sailing as we could, having our storm sail literally ripped off the mast, we were 80 miles away. So we had lost 25 miles just by trying to hold our ground. We couldn't go north, and we got a wind shift. And the wind shifted so that we could be on a reach, and then a broad reach. And so we just hauled the mail. We just sailed as fast as we could. We had one lone ham radio operator who was our lifeline at Palmer Station. And he just kept our spirits up and said, hang in there, guys. we got hot showers, we got a hot meal, and we have a nice warm Penguin pub waiting for you with a cold beer. So get yourselves in here. And we sailed in there with no heat, a very demoralized crew at the time, but they lifted our spirits. We eventually got the heat working a little bit, but the warmest we had been able to get the interior of our vessel was 37 degrees at the time, and we were soaking wet. So that was pretty close, numerous times. Horacio might even be with us still from Argentina, but we had a harrowing experience at Cape Horn too with 105 knots of wind. And there was another vessel down there that said, why don't you take the naval mooring ball? That's plenty sturdy for you to ride this thing out. Well, they rode it out on 2 anchors. And we didn't have the right kind of tackle for that mooring ball, but we had a 2.5 or 3 inch nylon line. And we set it up as well as we could so that we were kind of shooting back and forth, you know, through the tackle that we had. And I'll be darned if the wind and the pressure of 80 to 90 knots of gusts and willy-waws hitting us, slamming us from side to side, we sawed through that line. And if we would have gone all the way through, we would have been cast off into Never Never Land and probably aground and lost the vessel. So we had to, in the middle of the night, literally suspend Captain Mark Schrader upside down while he redid the tackle, and Herb and I were clipped in and clipped into him so that he could fix that tackle and we could ride the thing out. That was a very dangerous evening, and we again found out we had 105 knots. And then, of course, the earthquake that we survived in Chile, the 7th largest earthquake registered in the history of the world. We had the luck of leaving port just before the tsunami came in and wiped out the entire port and everything. It split the country in 2 and killed thousands of people. And that would have been the end of us. And we had just left and the tsunami came right underneath us. So we got very, very lucky numerous times. So those are just a few of the stories. So you have to get a little bit lucky out there, that's for sure.
So you've seen some beautiful places, and tell us, so did you see the Aurora Borealis and I forget what it's called in the southern hemisphere? So have you seen the northern and southern lights both? And how?
Not really, not until you know, we saw them faintly, because the thing about summertime in the Arctic or Antarctica is you have 24-hour daylight. And that's the reason you can do the Northwest Passage is, or sail to Antarctica, is because there's not a night. A night in those conditions would be deadly. And so you proceed and you try to get out of there before night exists. So we got back into Baffin Bay, for instance, on the eastern side, and I do have some faint images of the Northern Lights, but we didn't see it too well sailing. Now, I was in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge a couple of years ago, and then I was in the Yukon in the Gwich'in village of Old Crow and working on a photo project up there in the autumn, following the caribou and the hunting fall hunt there. And I have pictures of the most spectacular Aurora Borealis that I've ever seen in my life. And so I finally did get to see it, as I should have, on a pitch black night and with the lights dancing through the sky. So I did get to see it, but not so much while sailing.
So great question here. What would you recommend as a most effective option for individuals to work towards ocean conservation, both, you know, on a personal level, through action, but also, you know, through financial support?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of great groups out there. Ocean Conservancy, Oceana is one of my favorites, but also the Alaska Wilderness League that I work with is working both on, say, land and ocean conservation, and specifically Arctic Ocean there. Because I'm really kind of fine-tuned on those areas right now, specifically the Beaufort, Chukchi, and Bering Seas, and the vulnerable communities that are living there, and their precarious situations with food insecurity. So those are three great groups right there that are working specifically on ocean and land issues, but also we need to take care of our inland bodies of water and river systems, because the river systems that are draining into the oceans are causing so much of the problem. Here in Iowa, we're the largest producer of soil loss, sediments, and nitrate pollution that's going all the way down the Mississippi River and into the Gulf of Mexico, creating the dead zone. And these dead zones are forming all over the world, and 10 great river systems are causing about 90% of the plastic pollution around the world. So these are all things that we can be involved with locally through local conservation that connect also with ocean issues out there. A friend of mine, Mary Crowley, this is another one. She's a terrific sailor, human being conservationist. She's working on the Pacific garbage patch right now, Ocean Voyages Institute. And they're out there right now tracking ghost nets. And they're using satellite trackers. And then they're monitoring, working with NASA to see how these ghost nets are moving in and around the gyres, so that they can figure out how the plastics are moving through the ocean and through the ocean columns. So there's lots of great people out there. And for anybody interested, I'll share my email. Maybe you can post that, protectthearctic@gmail.com. Maybe you can share that, or we can figure out how to do that. And I'd be happy to follow up with any of these resources for conservation groups. But Ocean Voyage Institute is a great one also. So,
okay. Well, let's end with two simple and fun questions, because
awesome.
There's a number more, but we'll just do two. One, did you ever go swimming? And the second,
yeah.
are you also an ice boat sailor? So, did you ever go swimming in an ice boat sailor?
There you go. Yes, I do sail DNs. So we have DN sailing here on our lakes here, quite a few DN sailors. And also, yes, a little bit of swimming. I am a certified diver also. Herb and I did quite a bit of diving along the way on some of the reef systems, endangered reef systems, and Galapagos, and lots of diving. I did have to do some diving off the coast of Greenland also, over the Arctic Circle, because we got some fishing gear wrapped around our shaft and prop, so I had to go cut that off. We did some swimming near Puerto Rico, and quite frankly, it got a little dangerous. So swimming in the ocean, open ocean, when you're actually sailing or making a passage, can be really dangerous. You know, there's currents, things can happen. You can lose an engine, things can go sideways really quickly. So we didn't do a lot of that, but we did a little bit, especially when we were in some area that it was safe to do. But for the most part, we waited till we were ashore to, you know, find a nice pool to jump in at, you know, to go take a shower for the first time in, you know, in like 2 weeks or something.
Great.
I only took 7 showers, by the way, in 90 days through the Northwest Passage. That's something that you don't have the luxury of doing a whole lot.
Well, David, thank you again. What great stories, you know, what incredible journeys, what an inspiration to all of us to continue to explore and care for this world we live in, and to travel with companions on this journey called life, right? Because that's what makes it all possible.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Captain Mark Schrader was a solo circumnavigator, and I kind of thought about that for a while, and something sort of dawned on me that, you know, I'm really too much of a social person. I love people, and so it's really been the people, the friendships, meeting all the folks in these communities. I've never had a bad experience with a human being around the world, and it's just reaffirmed my faith in humanity and what we're capable of. And that's where I like to leave it, you know, is the hopeful side of things.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being part of the Wooden Boat Show. Thanks. We will look forward to having you up on campus, hopefully in the not too distant future. And thank you to everybody for being part of North House. Places like North House come alive because people get involved. And it's great to have people here. Thanks again to you, David and Justice, and the rest of the North House team. Thanks for making the Wooden Boat Show a reality.
Thank you all very, very much. I enjoyed it a lot.